Hey everyone. I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes for people to start filtering through, and then I'll introduce our special guest for today.
Kia ora, hey folks. Hi Sonia, I see Sonia, you've joined us. Second session for the day.
Second session?
Yes, yeah, we had a chat with the Diversify Behavioral Science Network. So a group call.
So Sonia will know all the answers. Is that what you're saying?
I think I'm asking the questions. So.
Okay, we might kick off and people will still filter through as people still come through. But just want to say a big thank you to everyone. This is our first meetup for 2023. It's good to be back. It's been a while. But also a big thank you to Plus UTS Business Futures for their continued support. Without their help, they organized the platform. They help us with everything. So without them, we couldn't actually do this. So it's great that they're continuing to help us out. Just a couple of things before I introduce our special guest today, who we're very, very lucky to have. We've made a few changes to the BE meetups, more of which will be announced shortly. A big one to take note of is that we're trying to have all of our meetups as the last Wednesday of each month so that you can plan for that. Our next event is Locked and Loaded and will be announced in a few days, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. All right, so today we're lucky enough to have Vishal George speaking. Now, you may already know Vishal, as he was nominated by Habit Weekly for the Content Person of the Year in 2022. On top of that, he also runs the Wellington Meetup. Vishal runs a boutique consultancy, Behavioural by Design, making behavioural science tools more accessible. As the chief behavioural scientist, he combines behavioural science with human-centered design and systems thinking to help organizations create positive sprinkles of behavioural change. His areas of specialization are social impact, financial well-being, and sustainability. He's also got a book that's about to come out called Money Mindsets. And Vishal, I wondered if you could just spend a couple of minutes telling us about this book and what to expect from you and when.
Kia ora, thanks Aaron, and thanks for having me on board. The book is called Money Mindsets, coming out soon, and it's about how our early relationship with money shapes how we behave with our money, what we do with our money, how we spend money, and how we save money. It works in this. I've been building on this metaphor of a money compass. So we all carry this money compass along with us every day. Some of us are not sure who's handed this compass to us. It's come from perhaps early childhood, perhaps salient encounters which we've had, values and belief systems, cultural norms and social norms, which may influence which direction we want to take with our money. And the money compass kind of like navigates us in a specific direction. The direction may be in line with our financial goals. Sometimes it's not aligned with our financial goals. So the book Money Mindsets gets us to reflect on where this compass is taking us, which are the mindsets we want to strengthen, what's working for us, and which are the mindsets that are no longer serving our best interest or taking us in the wrong direction, so to speak. It sort of got me thinking of my own money story, and this I added after writing all the chapters of the book, reflecting on my own money compass. And I've noticed myself carrying emotions of shame when it comes to making lots of money or even talking about making money. And there's this early story of mine, which I shared in the book, and it took some vulnerability for me to access this space. And the story is about how when I was 11 years old, I started a business with 3 of my friends, and we made tons of money. I had more money than I could spend, like every possible PlayStation game. I used to buy food in the cafeteria for my friends. Used to do the whole pay it forward before it became trendy on social media. And we did end up selling a bunch of things, right, from football jerseys to music posters for a huge markup, made lots of money. And one of our classmates ended up stealing a lot of money from his parents, the equivalent of maybe of a hatchback car, and was buying 30 fountain pens, 5 jerseys, and a lot of stuff. And we never stopped to question like what's going on here. And until the whole operations got busted. And I realized that's maybe not how I want to behave with my money. And even today, the idea of running a business, and I run a small business, but a business which makes a lot of money makes me feel a little uncomfortable. So yeah, that's my own money story that got picked up and which I've shared in the book too.
Thanks for sharing. But Vishal, I don't think you committed to when could we start to look out for this book or pre-order?
End March is when we're looking at getting it out. I'm potentially experimenting with getting the audiobook out first, just to see how it goes. I know there's a big market of audio listeners now, which is picking up. So I'm actually looking at an audio release first. So on Audible towards March end, and maybe towards the middle of the year on like physical books and ebooks.
Awesome. Just one thing that Vishal and I were chatting about before we start this session. Can everyone throw your questions in the chat as we go along? I'll jump in and read them out to Vishal, or try to get you on off mute to speak about it. So without further ado, mate, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. And I'm super grateful of this opportunity, and also grateful for you joining in today and sharing this virtual space with me. Since this is a meetup, but it's also an online meetup, but it's being hosted online from Sydney, I'd like to just first begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are hosting this meetup. I would like to pay my respect to elders past and present. There's a little Fakatoki, a proverb which I want to share from where I'm based in New Zealand. I'll say it out loud, and you can also read it out at your own pace if you'd like. Mate rongo ka moyo, mate moyo ka marama, mate marama ka matao, mate matao ka ora. So that proverb is from Te Reo Maori. It's a significant saying, and the English translation is, through listening comes awareness, through awareness comes understanding, through understanding comes knowledge, and through knowledge comes well-being and life. Cool. So today's session is pretty, I'm keen to get as many discussions going as we speak. I'm going to share a process, if you'd like, or a method of behavioral innovation. I've been a big believer in the notion that anyone can be a behavioral scientist with the right tools and mindsets. And today I'm going to share some of the tools from behavioral science, which I've been co-creating with a few collaborators and also experimenting with over the last few years. Just a little bit about who I am. I like to often introduce myself as a sourdough baker first. That's me sharing a little sourdough baking tutorial with my brother who's watching. That's a it's a turmeric pizza dough that I'm baking. And my brother is curiously like picking up a few skills, and he's become a pretty good baker himself now. Something which I've learned from the art of sourdough baking is experimentation and just the possibilities of getting quick feedback. A lot of behavioral science projects take time to run. There have been experiments which have taken me 3 months to run, and some experiments have taken up to 2 years to run. And the feedback loop is very, very slow. But with sourdough baking, I can try a 65% hydration. So that's 65% water content for any non-bakers in the audience, versus a 75% hydration. And I can see the results within 24 hours. I get to know what style of baking is working for me. And that got me thinking on this journey of innovation. If we have a feedback loop of 2 years for an experiment, how much are we learning? We may be running the most robust randomized control trial in the world. But if it takes us 6 months or a year to get the results, are we sacrificing a lot on quick learnings versus doing a robust experiment, which may or may not prove useful? So I've been working with this proposition of how do we innovate quickly? How do we run more trials and more experiments? And some of those lessons came from sourdough baking. I founded Behavioural by Design. We're a boutique consultancy, as Aaron introduced us. We combine behavioral science with methodologies of design and some of the sensibilities of design, including doing more rapid experimentation, alongside some systems thinking and how we approach. So not just looking at individual behavior change, but how can we change systems which enable and support behaviors? And my mission with Behavioral by Design is essentially to help teams learn and play with behavioral science tools. So some of the tools which I'm going to share here today are tools which I'd love for you to learn and play with, and let me know how it goes. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, so I'll share the deck for anyone who'd like to connect, or you could search me on LinkedIn. Cool. So I've been thinking about this proposition of behavioral innovation for a while. And one form of behavioral innovation has been most successful, and the experiments have run in the last 3 years. And it's this idea of creating a lab within an organization, a behavioral innovation lab, if you'd like. I think the challenge some of us face is innovation is quite often seen as something purely technological. One of my mentors, Rory Sutherland, who I know has had a session with the group, has famously said that innovation is psychological as much as technological. So thinking of this, one of the examples which Rory loves to give is the problem which Uber solves around ambiguity aversion. So the idea that if we don't know when our cab is going to show up, we're not going to press the button on the app to call a cab. It could lead to frustration if the cab comes late or early. There's uncertainty around this meeting point. The Uber solved this by showing you on the map that the driver's about 12 minutes away. You can continue to sip on your tea or read a book while you wait for your cab, and the 12 minutes just goes by. So the psychological solution which Uber works on is not just a technological challenge, it's a psychological challenge as much. And Uber's piloted many different experiments. So They've piloted one-tap ride, which was this idea of not entering your destination. And it was the first iteration of Uber where you would just push a button and a cab would show up, and you would then let the cab driver know your destination. It didn't quite work out because people were uncertain about the pricing. How much are they going to have to pay? Are they going to have to shell out a fortune? People liked a little bit more certainty around. So they abandoned the one press button, and now you have to enter your destination before you press the button, so you have clarity on price. They tried surge pricing, which was a major failure, but also an incredible learning for them. So they noticed when people saw the charge go up by 2.5x, they were quite unlikely to call an Uber. It added more friction in the process rather than being a frictionless process. They pulled out surge pricing, and now they just show you the price. So they don't tell you if it's 2x the price. They just show you the price as a dollar value. So tons of experiments run by Uber, and Uber Labs is a hotbed for experimentation at the moment. One of the experiments which I ran was with this proposition of creating a behavioral science lab where you don't work on a single experiment or a project, but you create a lab environment where multiple experiments are run. We all got our lab coats on and gave permission for teams to come up with experiment ideas, create a little psychological safety around experimentation, but also build a shared language. And Ruth Schmidt has often refers to the work of behavioral boundary conditions, and this idea of teams are inclined and teams have a strong desire to experiment and innovate more and more, but there's not always the right language and the right shared language in an organization to innovate. So having a lab creates space for also building up vocabulary, building up capability, building up confidence, not just for experimentation to sit on a small team's hand, but on the wider organization and people who actively engage with the lab. Cool. So after setting up like why we need a lab and why we need to be more innovative with behavioral science, I'll run you through a 5-step process which I've adopted. This is available online for anyone who'd like to see it. I'll share the link ahead. The process essentially kind of combines behavioral science with design thinking. So there are moments of divergence in this process. So essentially asking more questions versus getting solutions, and half the answer is in asking the right questions. So this process pushes us to ask more and more questions. It also diverges in how we generate ideas, and I'll make a case why we need to care more about the quantity of ideas versus the quality of ideas. This process gives an exercise to come up with divergent ideas. It also converges at parts. So there's like convergence on what are the key research insights, how do we synthesize complex information into one place, how do we carry forward our learnings from experiments. So experiments that work, how do we carry them forward, and experiments that don't work, which are equally important. What are the learnings that we converge on and carry forward? You can see the beta version out there. I've been experimenting with this process for 3 years. It still needs a little bit more tinkering. Maybe in another year of experimentation, I'll be happy to remove the beta version out of it. So if you do find, you will find that it will change over the next 6 months to 1 year as I continue iterating with this process. This is what the process looks like, 5 steps. The first step being exploring some of the hidden influences. What can we surface about what's going on in people's minds? We use the COMBI model in this case to look at some of the behavioral influences behind someone's decision making. The next step is around change opportunities. So this is a process of narrowing down into specific how might we questions to reframe the challenge into opportunities and understand the landscape of what's our opportunity space that we can play around with. It involves co-creation. So I strongly encourage teams to co-create with their customers when working in government, to co-create with the public, and the quality of idea generation is far superior when you have both customers and citizens, but also diverse teams within the organization involved. So different levels of management involved within the process, but also people across the spectrum. So involving data teams, involving design and product teams, and marketing and comms teams, etc., depending on the nature of the challenge. The next step is around experimental design. So, and here there's a trade-off which I'll talk about around speed and reliability. Quite often, there is a tendency in the behavioral science community to focus on reliability of experiments, but the speed of experimentation matters just as much as the reliability of the experimentation itself. Just the sourdough experiment, which I ran with baking bread, was a strong indicator, tell sign for me that having a process where you're getting rapid learnings matters as much as the robustness of the learnings. So looking at like what are quick experiments that we can run which will help us move forward with our ideas or pivot where needed. And the last step is around incremental innovation. So not looking at an experiment necessarily as a checkbox or a success sign that that's just the start of the innovation process. And it's circular in the sense that you don't quite finish experimenting, but you continue experimenting with new ideas as you continue to learn. So that's the incremental innovation notion around experiment, around the 5-step process. Before I go to each step, I have an example for the 5-step process just so that you get a chance to see what that looks like. I will talk about mindsets. I'm a strong advocate for mindsets over methods. You may forget some of the methods, but if you carry the right mindsets for innovation, I think that's all you need. The methods can change and be fluid and flexible. So as I go through the 5-step process, I'll sprinkle in the different mindsets that I think are key to the process itself. The first mindset is around the idea about embracing the known and unknown influences on behavior, largely influenced by 2 books, actually, one being The Hidden Half by Michael Blasland. Highly recommend reading the book, as well as Julia Gallup's book, The Scout Mindset. Quite often we tend to, the proposition behind Julia Gallup's book is quite often we tend to behave like soldiers when it comes to some of our beliefs and ideas. We also have language that soldiers use, such as to defend their idea or to conquer or to concede a point when we're conceding our experiment is not working. She pushes or advocates for this mindset called the Scout mindset, which essentially is about seeing the world how it really is, to be open to changing our beliefs, to changing our ideas, and to embracing curiosity in the process of discovery, and essentially not being a soldier or stuck on an idea. Now, Michael Blastland had a fantastic story in his book, which maybe drives this point home even better. His story is around bicycle thefts in West Germany. So this is 1980s West Germany. There were about 150,000 bikes which were stolen every year, if I remember correctly. Then something quite unusual happened. The next year, motorcycle thefts the next year had gone down by about 15%. And the next year it went down by about 40%, and then again 40%, and then about 50%. So it fell from about 150,000 to about 45,000 in this period. And it came as a big surprise, like not much had changed during this time. So people started taking credit for this win. Law enforcement had put their hands up to claim that they're enforcing law a bit stricter, a little better. There was also maybe some other groups which suggested that the social norms had changed, that it was the social and cultural norms had changed. It was frowned on upon. Theft, especially motorcycle theft, was frowned upon at the time. And that was an interesting hypothesis of its own. Looking back at the data, I think many years later, they discovered that it was quite unlikely for either of these hypotheses to be the case. There was something which really stood out in the data, and that was that thefts of cars had not reduced during the same time period from 1980 to 1983. Something else might have been going on. And here in the answer lied in a change, an unusual change in the law at the time around making helmets compulsory for motorcycle riders. So if you were riding around a bike without a helmet, i.e. You are highly likely to be riding a stolen bike on the road, and that had a big impact on the motorcycle thefts. And I think there's quite often these unknown influences, or these or the hidden half, as Michael Blastland likes to talk about. So I think any process should not just embrace what we know, but also some of what we don't know when it comes to changing behaviors. Cool. I'll walk through an example of what this process looks like in practice with a case study that I've got a few sticky notes on. This was a project with ECA, so that's the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority in New Zealand. And they came to us with this proposition around getting businesses to reduce their carbon emissions, which we captured as the what behaviors are we seeking to change. Something to note is there's a clear behavior, so there's a clear action which this government agency was seeking to drive, i.e. Reducing carbon emissions. So it wasn't attitudes, it was a clear behavior which was identified. We then went on to explore like who the audience is. So the primary audience for this work was small and medium enterprises. So we're targeting businesses with less than 50 employees as defined as a SME audience. There are also secondary audiences that we identified as part of this journey. So customers of these enterprises might be potential influencers, as well as suppliers. So maybe suppliers of electric vehicles if they were in the transportation business, for example. Other government agencies were potential secondary audiences. We defined a clear why, and I think the why quite often matters more than the what, and is a good sense check on are we moving in the right direction as an organization. We had a why around sustainable energy, delivering more prosperity, as well as improving the well-being of both current and future generations, which aligns very closely with the what. There was a time period in mind, so there was a campaign which was going to come up in June, so this was before the campaign came up. Thinking about touch points to reach the audience, we identified Sustainability Trust, NGO in New Zealand, as a touch point. So that's for businesses looking to go on a sustainable journey. There was talk around maybe creating a tool on the website, as well as social channels, newsletters, and other potential influencers, such as accounting softwares, which may show you your savings if you move to a more energy efficient option. Thinking about the unknown, and this is often the hidden half of influences. As part of this process, we embraced what we did not know at this point. So what assumptions were we making? Were we carrying any mental models or worldviews? Also, what didn't we know? So, and what did we need to find out before we run an intervention or an experiment? Some of the, I won't go through all of it, but some of the unknowns which came up are businesses even motivated to reduce their carbon footprint? Do small businesses especially, do they have the time and resources to invest into making changes? There's discussion around short-term costs versus long-term benefits. So will businesses actually make this transition? And will customers care if a business is more sustainable or not? So those were a few unknowns which were introduced, and as part of the process and this mindset, we were getting comfortable with stating both the knowns as well as the unknowns. The next step involved looking at synthesizing this. So we used the COMBI model. It's maybe the most widely used behavioral science model, as I've heard. And I know Elena had come earlier this year, was it last year, and has given a much better and more comprehensive outlook into the COMBI model. So this is a very short version of how you can use the COMBI model, but Elena is a far better source to further your understanding and how you can use this model in many different ways. COMBI essentially suggests that these three factors, COM, capability, opportunity, and motivation, influence behavior. Capability being either physical or psychological. Do people have the capacity to reduce, to take steps to reduce their carbon emissions, is an example of a psychological capability. So do people actually have the time to make that change? Opportunity, we can consider what are other businesses doing. We know social norms are often a big influence, as well as their environmental changes, prompts, notifications, which can change behavior. And motivation comes from both like our automatic motivation and our reflective motivation. So the way we've used COMBI in this process is to use COMBI to start categorizing the data. Essentially, what are the enablers and blockers behind this behavior change? There was some data from market research which had been done earlier in the year. And some of the factors which we surfaced, for example, in capability was businesses had an appreciation for environmental concerns, but survival had been elevated to being the core focus for now. So a survival mindset for many businesses was a potential barrier, but there was a recognition around the environmental concern. There was other, under opportunity, we surfaced that, or what we synthesized from the research was businesses, there were many businesses which were looking for tools and content that were both reliable and action-oriented. So they had a high desire to make a change, but they didn't know how to go about making that change. Under motivation, we surfaced a few factors. One factor which I might bring out is that many businesses were actually seeing the benefits of clean and clever energy use, both for communities and the environment. So there was positive motivation for businesses to making a transition or a change, which we categorized as an enabler. Okay, that like moves us to like our next mindset. So the next mindset is this whole concept of idea flow, inspired by the book by Jeremy Utley and Perry. Essentially, if you want to be more innovative, generate more ideas, the quantity of the ideas is far more important than the quality of ideas. A good indicator that you have enough ideas is when you have some really bad ideas out there, some ideas which can get you fired. That's when you have enough ideas. That's a good indicator that you are flexing your ideation within an organization. One of the reasons why this concept works is you can think of this process of coming up with many ideas as flexing a muscle. So if we're not used to coming up with ideas and we have a crisis which hits us, if we have a pandemic which hits us, or if we have high inflation or cost of living crisis which hits us, we don't have we've not flexed this muscle for long enough, you're quite unlikely to be able to flex this muscle going into idea flow. I can see someone raise their hand. Are we able to get them in?
Sorry, let me see who raised their hand. Where are you seeing that?
It may have gone. Yeah, I'll continue as we go.
Yeah.
Another example of idea flow is you can think of Uber's example, which I mentioned about earlier. So Uber had this proposition about being frictionless, and they did have to make quite a few pivots to become frictionless. So they did have to add some friction by introducing the price, but they also had to reduce some friction by removing surge pricing because that backfired. So quite often we need a whole range of ideas and set of ideas to continue on this journey of idea flow.
Now, we have had a question come through from Teresa. Do crises reinforce ideation muscles?
So I think a lack of flexing this muscle will make us less likely to flex it during a crisis. But flipping that around, if we do have many crises, so one followed by another and followed by another, which we are seeing at the moment, that means that we are a bit more agile, that we are a bit more flexible. So if we do have another natural disaster, for example, because we've already been through a shock, we may be more resilient and also more capable of coming up with ideas. There was a lot of discussion around having a pandemic playbook at the time of COVID, and we didn't actually have a pandemic. Very few organizations or governments in the world even had a playbook or knew what to do in that case. I think having a playbook on the back of many crises, so even though it's a past event, could be ideas which will filter into when we do have another crisis, we can carry forward some of those ideas.
Got another one for you from Jack. Hello, can you explain why do you think mindset is more important than method?
Nice, great question, Jack, and keep the questions coming. Definitely helps all our shared learning. my main belief behind this hypothesis is that something which I've noticed is processes quite often change. Best practices change, the technology which we have changes. So there's lots of change and variability which is introduced, and lots of the methods do need to keep up with these changes which take place. I think mindsets are stronger at lasting the test of time, especially broad mindsets such as to be more curious and to come up with more ideas. They're more resilient to changes and they're more flexible to changes. So even though processes might change quite often, mindsets tend to remain the same. I'll carry forward, and yeah, feel free to keep coming in with those questions. I love questions and discussions. That's definitely helping. Cool. I'm going to jump into how we can actually come up with many
ideas.
So this is a process which integrates two frameworks. One is the EAST framework from the Behavioral Insights unit. I'm not going to go through the framework itself, but I'll just give you a quick shortcut or a cheat code to use the EAST framework. So in coming up with how might we statements, for those of you who aren't familiar with the language of how might we, it comes from the school of design thinking. It's this idea that we don't know something, so we ask the question how, followed by the word might. So we don't know for certain whether this is true or false. This is an assumption, question, or hypothesis. And we implying that it's a collaborative process. So how might we make it? And you can select either of those four words, and you can read up about the EAST framework to get some more direction of which word is more suitable. And then you pick up your for from, so who's your audience from the 5Ws canvas, which I had showed you, as well as some of what you surfaced from the Combi canvas. So the way that looks like in practice, here's the example of the how might we's which we had come up with on the project. These are the finalized how might we's. So typically you come up with as many how might we questions as you can, and then you focus on a few how might we's to tackle as a group. So using the EAST framework, there was a strong recognition that there were many conscious consumers, and they may be a potential influence on businesses. So how might we make it easy for conscious consumers to buy from sustainable businesses? It was our first proposition. Our second proposition was around making it attractive for decision makers to share stories of doing good for the environment. And that's recognizing the strengths of businesses that are already doing good for the environment, such as Patagonia is a great example, and a growth and a story for other aspiring entrepreneurs and small businesses. Our third how might we that we selected was how might we make it social for our next generation to voice the new norms for businesses to be kind. This was the word kind over there was largely prompted by the contextual factor with Jacinda Ardern making kindness trendy again. So and we also looked at, some of the market research suggested that the next generation has a strong voice and a strong influence. So we wanted to push that proposition further. And fourth proposition that we selected using timely was how might we make it timely for innovative businesses to show how New Zealand can lead the low carbon future. And this was at a time where our pandemic response was seen very positively in the global scale, and riding on some of that, how could we play on both timely, but also the words around innovative businesses, putting New Zealand as world leaders, not just in its pandemic response, but also as also in its transition towards clean and clever energy use. As you see, this tends to be helps to. We started with one challenge. We've now got like 4 challenges already, and it helps in idea flow because each of these are an opportunity space for us to play with and come up with new creative ideas. So it stimulates more creativity and more idea creation. Something to keep in mind here is you'll notice a lot of these propositions are strengths-based. So they're also based on what's already working well. Quite often we focus on what's not working. And I think a lot can be gained by turning our attention to what's working with the grain of human beings and helping people move alongside that direction. Okay, I'm gonna maybe like give a little context behind language of behavior change. And this quote from Edward Sapir is very, very relevant for this. It makes me, the example which comes to my mind is the word umami, which comes from the Japanese word delicious. Until the I think it was till the 1980s, we didn't have language for umami. We just, it was ignored as a taste completely. So we thought we had just 4 taste receptors: sweet, salt, sour, and bitter. And a lot of food was described by these 4 taste receptors. And there was a moment where this Japanese professor had this soup, a dashi soup, so that's like a seaweed soup. And the taste he noticed was completely, couldn't be categorized as any of these 4 sweet, sour, salt, or bitter categories. And he was quite adamant that there had to be a new category created for it. And it did turn out that we also have umami receptors in the mouth. So it's actual taste perception. The interesting change is once it did become a word, umami is now widely accepted and discussed as a taste receptor by Instagram chefs all over the world. And it's just a small example of how when we have the language to describe something, we're far better at understanding what's going on behind the surface. And there's a lot of language which we can gain from behavioral science, which helps us understand what's playing on customers' minds, what are their thoughts, feelings, emotions, what are their pulls, what are their pains and pleasures. So there's a whole range of vocabulary which we can gain from behavioral science. I've been experimenting with this concept of behavioral granularity, motivated by the words of emotional granularity, which is widely accepted and recognized. So the idea being that we with emotional granularity, it's widely accepted that having a wide range of emotions to describe how we're feeling helps us express ourselves better. It also helps us connect with others better. It helps us feel weight taken off our shoulder. It helps us empathize better with others. So there's a whole range of benefits which comes from having this richer emotional granularity. And I'm making the same case that if we have a behavioral granularity, we're far better positioned to empathize and connect and relate with our customers. The term fun fact, for those of you who don't know the history of the word designated driver, was a import by the Harvard Center for Health Communication. And they partnered with Hollywood studios at the time. So many TV shows in the 90s started using the word designated driver, borrowed from what's quite common practice, or what was common practice in Scandinavian countries at the time, borrowed that to America and started using the language more and more through these sitcoms. And soon enough, a designated driver became part of people's vocabulary, and it soon became the norm to nominate a designated driver for the evening. There's some data on this on the case study. It's very hard to establish causality for deaths by drink driving, but during the time period of the campaign, there was about a 30% reduction in the number of deaths. So not necessarily causal, but there's a strong suggestion, just like having language to make a behavior a norm is more, helps a long way in helping people change their behaviors. So I think there's a lot which we can gain of not just equipping ourselves with the language of behavioral science, but also equipping people with the language of behavioral science. Some of my journey and how we can like improve our behavioral granularity. I've put out this book called 24 Pathways and a set of cards which go along with the book to help you improve your own behavioral granularity. There's also an online version for it. So the same content is available online, so you don't get the actual feel of playing with cards, but you can select filters as cards, and the filters essentially point you towards relevant behavioral principles which you can leverage to generate more ideas. So that's on our website. Cool. So where does this fit in within the five-step process? So this so going back to as a case study, it helps us to come up with many ideas, and here the essentially what we're trying to do in this step is to come up with as many ideas as possible. 10 ideas is just the anchor that I set in, but quite often for per person. So if there's 6 people in the room, that's 60 ideas that you have. But I think you can do far more than those number of ideas, and especially if you have a tool like the 24 pathways to help you think of like as prompts to think of different ideas. So we tested, so there was a card for the authority bias, for example, from the 24 pathways. So that's, and some of the thought starters behind that was looking at how would the message or a platform for our kids expect more kindness for the environment work? So there's a thought starter which came out. Loss aversion is one of the 24 pathways. So we can think of messages such as don't miss out on the benefits of clean and clever energy use, and save costs now by preparing your business for a low carbon future. So we're playing around with the loss aversion message and the social norms message. Again, many businesses like yours are taking steps to reduce your carbon emissions. And there was like also a commitment device, the idea at the end, I pledge to take the next steps to reduce my carbon footprint. So essentially what the cards and the 24 pathways helps you do, it helps you come up with many ideas. I'm often asked how many ideas is a good enough number to target. Something which has been proposed is the idea ratio. It takes around 2,000 good ideas to turn into 100 prototypes, and it then turns into one concept which is adopted. So it's even more relevant to flex that muscle of coming up with as many ideas so that you have this whole backlog of ideas which you're building up as an organization. the concept of idea flow is not just to let these ideas build up as sticky notes, but to then get into experimentation and this process of like pushing these ideas forward and running ideally multiple experiments at the same time. I'll give you a walkthrough of how we tested some of this within the space. But first, we have a mindset, which is priority over method. So I'm going to pause for the mindset. And this mindset is around celebrating the power of compound learnings from small experiments. For those of you who've read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, highly recommend it. And it's this idea, so if you can think of yourself as any journey you're in, a learning journey, whether it's playing a new instrument or learning a new language, if you just get 1% at it, 1% better every day, it doesn't feel like a whole lot more. You don't feel like you've mastered the language the next day. The feedback loop is slow when you get 1% better at something. But if you get 1% better at something every day, that's where you get the compound effect. So you get over a course of a year, you get 3,700% better at something. And that's this whole idea of compound learnings. So the idea of running many small experiments is to focus on how you can multiply your gains. Sometimes an intervention may lead to a 1% improvement, a 5% improvement, which may seem low. I think the cases where we see 50 to 60% improvements maybe the exception, they're not the norm. Quite often we have changes which are small, but running multiple experiments, we're able to harness some of that compounding effect of channeling small learnings. So you can, one way of getting that together is an experiment card. So based on reaching the step, you might have enough information to come up with a concept title. You may have a test duration. I push towards, at least my learning of 1 to 2 year experiments are way too slow. I try to push it down to, can you test it within a week? Maybe 2 weeks, but the idea being that we should focus on the velocity of experimentation, which adds a lot of value. The experiment card essentially gets you to put down your hypothesis. So why do you believe your idea will change behaviors? And start getting you into thinking about how will you test this idea. So you would have seen in the previous case study, there were like 10 different ideas that we had. So how are we going to test this idea? Here there's a trade-off again between speed and reliability. I push more towards speed, but making sure that you're not just asking your mom a question and validating your experiment on a sample size of 1. So you can think of what trade-off to make depending on how far you are in your experiment journey. When it's an early stage idea, a small sample size is fine. But if you're looking at an idea which you're going to roll out nationwide, you might want like a bigger sample size. So depending on where you are in your innovation process, you can scale up and scale down your sample size. So initial ideas to get traction, to get feedback, to get learnings, go for focus on speed. As you're looking at scaling your learnings, focus on reliability. And this also gets you to start thinking about like, what are you measuring? So what are the key metrics that you're going to start capturing? A key concept to bring in is there's 2 types of metrics to bring into play. So there's like our leading metrics. So what are the indicators that change as a result of our intervention? But there's also lagging metrics, which actually happen potentially few months down the line, an example of a leading and lagging metric. When I've run these innovation labs within organizations, one of the metrics which we look at driving is how many experiments is a team running. The last one I set a benchmark of 30 experiments within 3 months was a target, and we're going to measure this through teams reporting on their idea and how far they are to implementing their idea. This takes time, so we know that it doesn't. The teams would need time to design this experiment and to implement this experiment and to get the learnings. But what we did start noticing in the meantime is the language within the organization started changing. So there was far more briefs within the organization which included language from behavioral science, such as social norms and the need to test out ideas. So that was our leading metric, and our lagging metric was the actual number of experiments. So we might not see the data right away for some of our metrics, but it's worth recording what are the metrics that we believe are going to be leading metrics, and what are the metrics which will take time for us to capture. Cool. So going into the case study, that's essentially how we did test out many of these ideas. We use a testing platform which my team and I have created. We essentially got 388 businesses, small business owners, to come on board and to complete this simple swipe left, swipe right test. And what we were looking at is not just whether these messages were motivating for people. So if it was motivating for people, they swiped right, but also how quickly they swiped right or swiped left. And that's an indicator of some of people's system one response. So what was like their automatic response to that? Was that a hell yeah message, or was that a yeah, nah message? And they took a bit of while to swipe right. So we looked at those as our two metrics, just to get a quick indicator. So this is the idea about focusing on speed over reliability. It was a very early stage. There were many very early stage ideas which we wanted to get does this idea have some traction? Is it a desirable idea? Before we went on to building a concept on the back of the idea. Here's the wide range of the full range of ideas that we had. There were 18 different ideas that we tested within this platform. I won't read all of them out loud, but I'll give maybe like 2 minutes. I'm keen to hear from the team your predictions of what you think was the most motivating idea in this list. You can put your answer in the chat.
Sorry, Vishal, we're also about 5 minutes past.
Oh yes, I did totally lose track of time. I might skip this part.
Yeah, if we could, yeah, if we skip to a couple more slides and then maybe finish up with a couple more questions if there are any.
Yeah, we can go straight into questions and reflections. For anyone who did want to get all these tools, I do have it all cataloged, so you can enter into our website and get it. I'll pause now. I'm very excited to hear any questions, and thoughts, and reflections that you may have.
I personally think that's, yeah, as I said at the beginning, we're really lucky to have you on board. I think that's such a robust process to follow and really standardizes the work that everyone's doing. So how you've woven in COM-B and then you've taken design thinking to do the how might we's. I just think it's really clever what you've done. You can see how it's such a brilliant platform and that the ideation flows through. And yeah, I love it, mate.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I've been tinkering and like pushing myself in this whole state of idea flow. So could you come up with, I do this exercise every day to exercise my own ideation muscle. So come up with 10 ideas every day. That I just think up like a problem, but the problem's not as important as the process of forcing myself with a pen and paper to just like write down 10 ideas. What I have noticed in my experiment of doing it for the last few weeks is my time's come down by half. I'm able to like get ideas out way quicker. But I still think that I'm definitely going to continue that process. So I definitely encourage anyone who wants to experiment with that. Like yesterday's idea flow I wrote about was about how I don't take my phone, ideas to stop myself from looking at the phone first thing in the morning. And at least one of the ideas now, which I am piloting, is to keep my phone in another room. But yeah, you can pick up any problem which you have and just exercise that idea flow.
My wife does the same thing. But because she can rely on me having my phone to set the alarm. So she's found her hack. Got a question from Teresa. What is a reliable, valid sample size? Might be contextual for you, but
good question. I'm going to go with the boring answer first. So there's no right, there's no perfect answer. So it's very situational based. Some of the rules of thumb which you can follow is the law of large numbers. Less than 30, anything less than 30, I'd be skeptical about. And the second is to get some understanding of how much confidence do you need in your answer. So sometimes looking for there's a trade-off between looking for having high confidence in your result versus the time and cost it actually takes to get that result. Typically for a survey, a rule of thumb, which I also follow, is 400 participants. That's based on looking at a 5% margin of error on either side. But again, it's very context specific. Working with industries like the healthcare, you may want, and finance, you may want more confidence and less of a margin of error. But if you're looking at maybe sales and marketing or some intervention which may not have a negative impact on people, then you could go for a smaller sample size. So very context specific with industry.
Awesome. Vishal, there's a few comments in there just thanking you and saying that this is brilliant. People are going to be exploring your website to learn more and looking at your toolkits. I'd also encourage everyone to keep an eye out for Vishal's book that's coming out in March for the pre-order, Money Mindsets. I've got that right, haven't I, Vishal? Money Mindsets?
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. In case anyone didn't realize, it's actually 9 o'clock for Vishal as well. So like not only has he blessed us with this presentation and everything, but he's stayed pretty late for us. So Vishal, mate, can't thank you enough. That was awesome.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sharing the space with me.
No, thank you, mate. All right, mate. Take care.